Brexit. For 5 years now, the UK has been outside the EU. In this tumultuous time, we've witnessed a carousel of chaos. 6 prime ministers, 2 monarchs, and a deadly virus which throttled our economy into a 2-year twilight. That pivotal vote in 2016, a volcanic eruption of change, planted the seeds to Trump, Farage, and a worldwide sense that the status quo no longer had to be adhered to. But what was the cost? And was it really worthwhile? I've split this video in 3 parts, telling the story of the beginning, middle, and aftermath of Brexit.
Well, at 20 minutes to 5, we can now say the decision taken in 1975 by this country to join the common market has been reversed.
Brexit was not just a political manoeuvre. It was a heart-wrenching moment when the Conservatives, for the second time, found themselves bending the knee to the surging tide of a third party's influence. Scotland, well, they had the SNP, a cosy political blanket to wrap around their grievances. But alas, the poor north of England and Wales, feeling as neglected as a middle child at a family reunion, had no such comfort. Their only rebellious shout into the void was to vote for Brexit. A political tantrum, if you will. But calling it dissatisfaction? That's like calling a hurricane a bit of a breeze. In the quest for a word that won't stir the pot in 2025, let's just say what they felt was something more intense. But we are getting ahead of ourselves there.
May I make a few comments first? One of the difficulties here has been to get clear the nature of the problem. We are not asking for a penny piece of community money for Britain. What we are asking is for a very large amount of our own money back, over and above what we contribute to the community, which is covered by our receipts from the community.
But our bond with Europe was woven with a different thread than that of our continental neighbours. Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady, saw her reign over Britain challenged. Not by foreign foes, but by the very idea of a European single currency.
Of course we are differing. Of course the chairman or the president of the Commission, Mr. Delors, said at press conference the other day that he wanted the European Parliament to be the democratic body of the community, he wanted the Commission to be the executive, and he wanted the Council of Ministers to be the Senate. No, no, no.
Her stance against it partly led to her fall from grace.
A unique day in London's financial markets ended with the Chancellor announcing that the pound was being suspended from the ERM, and that the second of 2 dramatic interest rate rises during the day was after all cancelled.
Her successor, John Major, inherited a kingdom at odds with its own fate. Britain in those days was part of the European exchange rate mechanism, a precursor to the euro, where the pound had to stay within 6% of the value of the German Deutschmark.
It will leave a stain on the character of his government that will only be erased by a new government with a fresh mandate that will restore confidence in our public life for good.
But under Major's watch, the British economy faltered, weakened and weary. Germany, with its high interest rates to tame inflation, stood firm. With investors sensing the pound's overvaluation, they began to sell it off in droves. In an attempt to tether the plummeting pound, Major's government hiked interest rates by a staggering 15%. But it was like trying to hold back the tide with a sieve. The disaster, known as Black Wednesday, forced Britain to abandon the ERM, leaving Major's political dreams in ruins. In the early 2000s, when Tony Blair rose to power, the air was thick with optimism. Britain was not just surviving, it was thriving, with a vision of progress and prosperity that seemed unstoppable. But then, just as the world seemed set on this path of endless sunshine, a major event shook the very foundations of global stability.
Good evening. America came under attack today from international terrorists on a scale that made it more an act of war.
On September the 11th, 2001, the world watched in horror as the Twin Towers fell. Suddenly, Britain's optimistic bubble was pierced by the harsh reality of global terrorism.
This is the time for this House, not just this government or indeed this Prime Minister, but for this House to give a lead. To show that we will stand up for what we know to be right. To show that we will confront the tyrannies and dictatorships and terrorists who put our way of life at risk. To show at the moment of decision that we have the courage to do the right thing. I beg to move the motion.
After 9/11, our Prime Minister, Tony Blair, joined America into war with Iraq.
For all of this, I express more sorrow, regret, and apology than you may ever know or can believe.
His deceit or incompetence joining because of the lie of weapons of mass destruction. This once trusted politician morphed into a dark puppeteer, pulling the strings of our army to unleash a storm of death upon an estimated 100,000 to 1 million innocent civilians. His actions sucked in the light of peace, emboldening Islamic terrorism and birthing Islamophobia from the far right. Blairites, once seen as beacons of hope, now stood as spectres drenched in blood, their legacy forever tainted. And the European Union decided to stretch its arms towards the east, welcoming the Baltic states into its fold. This expansion was like opening the floodgates, bringing with it a wave of new faces to British shores. The shores of Britain, once so familiar, now echoed with new languages, new dreams and new challenges. And from this sea of change rose UKIP.
On the budget, you said there'd be no surrender of the UK rebate. Well, it seems to me that you've given away £7 billion of British taxpayers' money for nothing in return. Your only achievement is to open talks with Turkey, which is opposed by the vast majority of people in Europe and will lead to an even higher bill. Why should British taxpayers pay for new sewers in Budapest, for a new underground system in Warsaw, when our own public services are crumbling in London? Why should we pay a penny piece into an organisation whose accounts have not been signed off by the auditors for the last 11 years in a row?
A political wave that would stir the waters of British politics for years to come, setting the stage for the great Brexit tale. Thus our story with Europe is not just one of economics or politics, but of a nation's soul, navigating through the storms of change, seeking its identity amidst the tides of time. But then there were certain events that would pretty much seal the deal for the Brexit vote.
160-year history of Lehman Brothers Bank came to an end. It was a bank that had survived the Great Depression, and it had survived 2 world wars, but it could not survive this global storm, and 25,000 people lost their jobs overnight.
In 2008, the economy stumbled into a recession. By 2009, RMPs, seemingly oblivious to the economic despair around them, were caught with their hands in the till, overclaiming on their expenses as if the recession was just a minor inconvenience. And then in 2010, Gordon Brown, in a moment of sheer disconnect, dismissed genuine public concerns about migration as bigoted.
That was a disaster. Well, just... Okay. Should never have put me up with that woman. Whose idea was that?
I don't know, I didn't see.
It was Sue, I think. They're just ridiculous.
I'm not sure they'll go with that one.
They will go with it.
What did she say?
Oh, everything. She's just a sort of bigoted woman that said she used to be Labour. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Further alienating the electorate and losing him the election.
And at all times, what I will do is put the national interest first to make sure we have good, strong, stable government for our country.
How heartwarming it was when the replacement government of the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats came along, telling us voters,
we're all in this together.
The deficit, now a cosy £61 billion, and the austerity, Oh, it's just been a fantastic journey, slashing funding and growth, turning our public services into a beautiful pile of rubble, truly a masterclass of governance. The bankers, with their unchecked greed, had plunged us into a financial crisis, leaving countless lives in ruins, dreams shattered and trust in tatters. Is it any wonder we turned a deaf ear to their advice on Brexit? Their promises as hollow as the vaults that they left empty?
Let's move on. All say the same thing.
Prime Minister, your
about the economic...
Your scaremongering does not stop at the economy, does it? What comes first, World War III or the global Brexit recession?
What of the BBC? Once a beacon of truth, now flickering in the storm of scandals. Parliament and the government, which had pushed for us to remain, had lost all credibility. So this was our moment of reckoning. There was a real, tangible chance for improvement for those areas that had been left behind, crying out for change. It wasn't just about controlling migration or fixing our shattered economy. It was about standing up, about giving a resounding no to the status quo. We were staring down the barrel of another 5 bleak years under David Cameron, but then we had a choice. Every vote to leave was a vote for hope, for a future where we decided our fate. It wasn't just another election, it was a revolution at the ballot box. We didn't let that opportunity slip away. We voted leave and we reclaimed our country from the clutches of deceit and despair. The future of Britain hung in the balance, and our votes were the keys to unlocking a new dawn. We acted then, before it was too late. In 2016 we embraced the vote to leave with a hopeful heart, dreaming of a new dawn where Britain could flourish independently, forging trade deals across the globe that would leave our European neighbours in awe. We imagined a future where we could reclaim our sovereignty, control our borders, and tailor our laws to our unique needs. The promise was not just one of economic horizons, but also revitalising our local industries, boosting tourism, and enhancing our global influence. While there were warnings and scepticism about validity given the sources, the allure of what could be was intoxicating. 5 years ago I made a video predicting the outcomes had we stayed in the EU. And I'm afraid to say, most of those scenarios I envisioned under a Remain scenario have indeed come to pass, even though we've left. So I ask you, was our vote to leave truly about changing our destiny? Or was it just a different path leading to the same inevitable outcomes? And what do you think now, looking back, was our decision to leave the EU the real catalyst for change? Or was it merely a sideshow to the grand narrative of our times? We voted to leave, catapulting our government into a whirlwind of chaos, forcing them to frantically pick up the shattered pieces of our nation now on the brink. They were left to navigate through the rubble of a political landscape completely upended, tasked with the Herculean effort of untangling decades of integration, all while the clock ticked ominously towards an unknown future.
I will do everything I can as Prime Minister to steady the ship over the coming weeks and months. But I do not think it would be right for me to try to be the captain that steers our country to its next destination.
From the Brexit referendum in 2016 until the general election of 2020, before the onset of the global pandemic, Britain experienced a continuous state of political turmoil. Britain had chosen to leave the EU, but for crying out loud, there was no plan, no roadmap on how we would even leave, or when we would actually exit. Did we need to stay in the customs union or single market? How in the world would the Northern Ireland border work? And what if we didn't secure a deal with the EU? Would Parliament even get its act together to agree on anything? These endless technicalities, tangled up in the web of establishment bureaucracy, just spat in the face of the emotional drive behind the vote to leave. It's like they were deliberately dragging their feet, complicating and delaying the process at every turn, making a mockery of our decision. There were two main sides, each with their own extremes. In the centre, on one side, were the soft Remainers, who believed that Britain had made a mistake by voting to leave, and that the economic and international impacts should be minimised. These individuals sought to keep the UK in the customs union or single market. The customs union allows for the free movement of goods between countries without quotas, tariffs, or customs checks, applying a common external tariff to goods from outside the union. However, the problem for the UK was that membership would prevent us from making independent trade deals with non-EU nations or setting our own tariffs. Instead, we would have to apply the EU's tariffs without having a say in their determination. The single market extends further, facilitating easy operations for businesses and individuals across borders. However, this comes with free movement, leading to significant immigration. Remaining in the single market while leaving the EU would mean having no say in EU parliamentary decisions. Thus, the soft Remainers, including Theresa May and Labour, found common ground with the staunch advocates of rejoining, like the Liberal Democrats. They passionately argued for a return to the EU, whether through a second referendum or an election, because in their view, there was simply no path where Britain could exit the EU and still harvest any of the promised benefits. They painted a picture of a Britain on a perilous lose-lose trajectory, where every step away from Europe was a step into economic and cultural decline. They urged, with fervent conviction, that turning back on Brexit was not just an option, but an urgent necessity to restore our prosperity, unity, and global standing. On the opposite side were the Leavers. Some of them desired a deal with the EU, while others were content to trade under World Trade Organization rules without any deal at all. But these descriptions barely scratch the surface of the intense parliamentary emotions during that period. Let's explore the voters who had much more entrenched views, deeply rooted in their beliefs and experience. For the liberally minded Remainers, Britain was a vibrant tapestry of diversity and progress, a haven where the spirit of openness flourished. The stereotype painted these individuals as coming from the comfort of middle-class, educated background, with lives enriched by office jobs and exotic holidays abroad. They embraced alternative cultures as a source of enrichment, thriving on the fluid movement of people which allowed them to embark on gap years and work adventures overseas. With the luxury of time and means, they could gather in the heart of London, protesting with a sense of purpose and unity. They proudly waved their EU flag, not just as a symbol as the beginning of their cherished liberation and expensive freedoms, viewing the prospect of leaving the EU as an unnecessary shackle on their boundless world.
Is doing things the right way, proper way, and really working for your survival. I've been told I have the softest hands in the world because I've done no manual labour in my life. So
often overlooked, yet true, there exists a segment of Britain where manual labour is a distant concept, reserved for others, allowing these individuals to focus on intellectual pursuits and cultural exchanges. On one side we have the migrants, the backbone of our low-skilled manual workforce. Like the tireless hands that pick our fruit or the caring hands that look after our elderly, day in, day out. These are the individuals who fill the roles that many of us feared would vanish if we left the EU. Roles essential, yet often overlooked. On the other side, imagine the upper echelons of society, the elite, celebrities basking in their fame, politicians navigating the corridors of power, and the royals adorned in their regal splendour. These are the people who, by virtue of their sheer status, are so far removed from the reality of manual labour that it might as well be a foreign concept. They live in a bubble where the thought of engaging in such work is as alien as the idea of not having a staff to cater to their every need. The irony is palpable. These elites, so detached from the gritty realities of manual labour and working class life, are often the most vocal about the benefits of high migration, yet they remain blissfully ignorant of the struggles it brings. Their fear isn't of too many migrants, but rather of too few, because in their world, the challenges of migration are theoretical, not tangible. They worry about a shortage of workers for jobs they would never consider doing themselves, while the migrants and working classes toil away. The young in particular, those in liberal hubs like London and the South East, were left feeling abandoned amidst the ignorant nostalgia of Leave voters. Their vision of a promising future was callously stripped away against their vehement protests. They battled fiercely to prevent the impending changes, but in the end their efforts were in vain, leaving them to grapple with a future they did not choose. Meanwhile, in the dim light of a cramped, rented room, a working-class, non-migrant individual with scant qualifications faces the relentless challenge of securing employment. The job market, already unforgiving, seems to close its doors tighter each day. Housing shortages squeeze their already meagre living wage, turning the simple act of having a roof over the head into a luxury with rent costs. Public services, once a pillar of support, are now stretched thin. Securing a doctor's appointment feels like winning an elusive prize. As they walk through their neighbourhood, they witness the transformation of familiar streets into a marketplace of foreign shops, selling goods and catering to communities they feel increasingly alienated from. The weekly grocery shop, once routine, becomes a daunting task, both pricier and more exclusive in its offerings. Given this bleak reality, where every step forward feels like 2 steps back, do you truly think this person will celebrate the economic advantages of migration? Or will they, in their struggle, question the benefits touted by those who do not share their daily grind? Many of those who voted for Brexit were of an older generation, carrying with them a nostalgia for Britain that had seen profound transformation since the war. Their support for Brexit was, in many ways, a longing to recapture the essence of a time before the complexities of modern integration, a British echo of "Make America Great Again." The vote was imbued with a hopeful promise to return to the days of 1973, when the UK first joined what was then the common market, a time remembered with those rose-tinted glasses for its perceived simplicity and national identity.
I just want to ask her, what part of the word leave don't you understand?
This case, have you read the case?
Yes, and you're arguing
Yes.
that Parliament should have a say, but do you want us, ultimately, okay, you accept we're leaving the European Union, do you want us to stay part of the single market?
That is not, I'm not the politician. I'm not the politician here.
Those who voted to leave the EU were often perceived as being underestimated, as though they were deemed too unintelligent to comprehend their own decision. To stereotype once more, many of those voters hailed from working class, academically privileged backgrounds. Far from the common portrayal of being racially prejudiced, the majority were not. They were manipulated by a political and media environment that capitalised on their frustrations. With the NHS deteriorating and successive governments offering little change, they seized a chance to disrupt the status quo. The prolonged and intense efforts to negate or reverse the Brexit vote only underscored how long the working classes had felt belittled and ignored by the powers that be. But there is a third player in this elaborate political theatre: the opportunist. We can never really be sure if the endless delays in Parliament were just part of the script for career politicians, playing their roles to extend their time in the spotlight, or if they were genuinely grappling with the complexities of the issue. Similarly, we might never discern whether the architects of Brexit were true believers in their cause or merely actors on a stage, reciting lines for personal gain. These individuals, part of the elite echelon, have never known the turmoil of working class life, yet readily scapegoat migrants to stoke political fear and advance their own agendas. Their rhetoric conveniently skirts around the economic repercussions of Brexit, revealing a profound disregard for the tangible impacts on the common citizen. The situation in Northern Ireland was a stark example of how the disruptors within the DUP clash with those who seem to disregard the region's unique sensitivities. The UK's ambition to exit the Customs Union threatened to impose border checks, a move that could have shattered the peace we held so dear. The Good Friday Agreement, a delicate flower of reconciliation, made the notion of checks unthinkable. The mere contemplation of disrupting this fragile peace felt like reopening old wounds, a constant reminder of how easily the intricate balance we had nurtured could collapse under the weight of Brexit's turmoil. Theresa May's solution was called the Irish backstop. This plan would have kept the whole UK in a customs union, with Northern Ireland following EU rules even more closely. Importantly, the UK would have needed the EU's permission to end this arrangement. After 3 embarrassing rejections, it was this fumble that tripped Theresa May up, forcing her to resign and a rather ungraceful exit.
The second female Prime Minister, but certainly not the last. I do so with no ill will, but with enormous and enduring gratitude to have had the opportunity to serve the country I love.
In fact, this entire period was plagued with political chaos. A nightmare so vivid that unprecedented became an everyday word. The tragic assassination of Joe Cox, a dark stain in our nation's stole. The proroguing of Parliament, a blatant slap in the face of democracy, and the streets filled with multiple mass protests, a nation divided and in turmoil. This was Britain at its absolute worst, a country in the throes of despair where the fabric of our society seemed to unravel at the seams. It was a time when the very essence of our political stability was shattered, leaving us to witness the ugliest side of our collective existence. Eventually, however, Boris Johnson negotiated a new deal, and after his resounding victory in the 2020 election, it was passed by Parliament.
The question is that motion A be agreed to. As many of that opinion will say content? Content. The contrary not content? The contents have it.
The deal we eventually got was an absolute disaster. Northern Ireland ended up stuck in the single market for goods, which effectively slapped a border right in the middle of the Irish Sea, a move so unpopular it had to be diluted with the so-called Windsor Framework in 2023. This deal was a mess from the start, complicating everything and leaving us with a half-baked solution that pleased no one. The Brexit period was doomed to fail from the start. It was inevitable that it would embolden the push for Scottish independence given their clear vote to remain. Labour struggled to pick a side, their desperate plea for a second referendum was a foregone conclusion. Both the main parties, Conservative and Labour, splintered into various fractions, each pulling into different directions. The years between 2016 and 2020 exposed a chasm in our society, a deep divide between the haves and have-nots, revealing the underlying fractures that Brexit was always going to lay bare. It was all just a matter of time. The nation was weary. Having endured 3 elections where Brexit dominated the discourse, the prolonged, seemingly endless debate had worn down patience to its very core. It was high time to get Brexit done. In a decisive move, Britain handed Boris Johnson and the Tories a landslide majority, eager to put an end to the saga. At last, Brexit truly meant Brexit. Was it truly worth it? For many, Brexit symbolised a resounding declaration, a bold statement in capital letters. Listen to us. Yet beneath that defiant cry, one must wonder if the years of upheaval and the aftermath truly justified the cause. The bleak reality is stark. With an economy limping along at a mere 0.1% growth and net migration soaring into the hundreds of thousands, Brexit has faltered dramatically. A staggering 55% of Brits now regret their choice to leave, as per YouGov polls. Ports are choked with delays, tariffs have escalated costs, and supply chains are in disarray. Meanwhile, the EU continues to fish in the UK waters, and Scotland's push for independence through rejoining the EU seems increasingly justified. So no, it wasn't worth it. But on the bright side, Britain has ambitionally applied to join the Trans-Pacific Partnership, opening doors to vast new markets. We've already sealed impressive trade deals with Japan, Australia and New Zealand, setting the stage for economic synergy. There's a promising horizon for trade agreements with India and potentially even with America under a Trump administration.
Well, we're going to see what happens. It'll happen, but we'll see how things work out. It might happen with that, but it will definitely happen with the European Union. I can tell you that, because they've really taken advantage of us. And
beyond the immediate trade rules and free movement, which admittedly pose challenges, the true boon of Brexit lies in our newfound political independence. This autonomy allowed us to roll out the pandemic vaccine at one of the fastest rates globally, showcasing our agility and sovereignty in critical moments. And we can no longer point the finger at the EU for our shortcomings. The Office for Budget Responsibilities Assessment is that our trade will decrease by 4% as a result of Brexit. And this was squarely on us. The trade agreements we've managed to secure will hardly make a dent in reversing that loss.
The UK is on course to have the highest migration rate in Europe. From 2022 to 2032, the population is going to go up from 67.6 million to 72.5 million, according to projections.
The surge in non-EU migration, well, that's on us too. We now have to endure longer waits at non-EU passport lanes and bear the additional costs of travel. Yet, the net benefit from no longer contributing to the EU budget is £9 billion annually, although we can't definitely define that, given that we can't say what we would have been paying now. In summary, Brexit has proven to be a failure. Our governments have failed to capitalise on its potential, and the few benefits we've seen have been negligible. But let's face it, we've also had plenty of excuses to mask the economic impact from Brexit. First off, there was the pandemic, which conveniently shut down the economy for 2 years, providing a perfect scapegoat. And then came the Liz Truss government, whose policies sent the pound plummeting and inflation soaring, giving us another reason to deflect blame. And don't forget the new Labour government, whose non-dom tax policies and general pessimism might have spooked the economy into stagnation. It's almost like we've had a series of convenient alibis to explain away the real impact of Brexit. But Brexit just shines a glaring spotlight back on our own government, stripping away the veil of foreign influence excuses. Things like, why on earth did Liz Truss propose those unfunded tax cuts in the first place? And why was there no safety net to prevent the ensuing market chaos? It's infuriating how long it took to realise HS2 might never see the light of day, and the third runway at Heathrow remains a distant dream. Why are our governments floundering so badly at controlling migration? And why is our economy so pathetically dependent on services? How do we even begin to make it grow? These are the questions that should be keeping our leaders up at night, not deflecting blame across the channel. These questions underscore the labyrinth nature of politics, revealing it to be far more than a simple yes, no, in-out proposition. The realm of governance is dominated by technicalities, bureaucracy, and intricate detail. The inherent impatience of democracy and its voters clashes starkly with the extensive time required to thoroughly discuss, plan, and budget for substantial change. And so Brexit serves as a cautionary tale, demonstrating that even meticulously crafted policies like the Good Friday Agreement are not impervious to future challenges. The proroguing of Parliament and Trump's executive orders illustrate the occasional necessity to enact sweeping policies to justify the electorate's immediate desires. Conversely, Liz Truss's budget debacle acts as a stark warning on the perils of overly hastily or ill-considered policy implementation. Britain's caught in this complex web has yet to strike a balance between the need for deliberation and the demand for swift action, highlighting the intricate dance between democratic impulses and effective governance. One supposed change we can attribute to Brexit is the rise of Nigel Farage and Reform UK. But even this feels kind of like deja vu. Without his celebrity status, they wouldn't be where they are in the polls today, yet their emergence feels more like a rehash than a revolution. The Brexit years were to some evidence that the entire parliamentary system of Labour and the Conservatives, the Commons and the House of Lords, was incapable of delivering a policy democratically endorsed by the British public. Reform UK, while purporting to represent a shift, seems merely to echo the same old complaints about the two-party system. They've capitalised on the undemocratic musical chairs of Tory Prime Ministers over 14 years of failure in managing inflation, the economy, the NHS, migration and housing, ending in internal party strife. And now Labour steps in, cutting winter fuel allowance for pensioners, a move that smacks of austerity measures from 15 years ago that fueled the initial Brexit vote in the first place. They're delaying local elections, reminiscent of the calls for a second referendum, suggesting nothing has fundamentally shifted in our political landscape. Britain in 2025 isn't markedly different from 2016. Scotland still leans towards the SNP, Northern Ireland grumbles under EU regulations, and a terrorist attack has once again dominated headlines. Even Donald Trump's return to the political scene in the US adds to this eerie sense of stasis. Brexit was meant to change Britain, yet here we are, caught in the same cycle, the same divisions, the same frustrations. It seems the more things change, the more they stay the same. Yet, the landscape of Britain has morphed into something unrecognisable since 2016, taking on a dystopian hue. The disinformation that once fueled the Brexit vote is now exponentially more sinister, as it can be generated by AI, crafting lies with alarming precision. Meanwhile, the solutions to our economic problems are also born from the same artificial intelligence, creating a world where truth and power is a malleable construct derived from algorithms and machine learning. Comparing today's UK politics to this straightforward divide of remain and leave feels almost quaint. The stark divide between the anti-woke crowd and their liberal counterparts has cast a long, dark shadow over the internet, transforming it into a battleground of ideologies. On one side, the anti-woke movement has facilitated a slippery slope from the criticism of migration policies to openly repugnant, xenophobic, racist content. The American right to free speech, coupled with Elon Musk's acquisition of X, has birthed a platform where transphobia, homophobia, and racism flourish, unchecked, leading to real-world consequences like the Stockport riots in the UK and the infamous Capitol riots in the US. These events serve as chilling reminders that social media isn't just about swaying votes, but can incite dangerous civilian uprising. On the other end of the spectrum, the liberal side of the internet has also darkened, adopting its own brand of extremism by silencing dissent against movements like Black Lives Matter or debates around transgender rights. Here, support for or refusal to criticise Hamas, designated as a terrorist organisation, is disturbingly common. Meanwhile, celebrity influencers like Gary Lineker and J.K. Rowling have seen their audiences split down the middle. Their once unified followings now bitterly divided. The internet, much like during the Brexit debate, no longer allows for crossing sides. The fence has turned into an impenetrable wall, with each side retreating further into their own echo chambers, amplifying the darkness that now defines the digital age. Now, one's political allegiance can be inferred not by geography, but by their social media platform they frequent, be it X or Blue Sky. This digital segregation has birthed insular echo chambers, where individuals only converse with like-minded avatars, convincing themselves of their own righteousness, only to be bewildered when reality, in the form of election results, defies their insular logic. Figures like Lawrence Fox or Jeremy Corbyn, once seen as fringe, are now idolised by online cults, a testament to the power of the internet to radicalise and idolise. Brexit wasn't the start of this phenomenon, but it was certainly an early alarming symptom of how echo chambers can manipulate and polarise, benefiting those who know how to navigate or exploit these digital dystopias. I voted to leave the EU in 2016. Do I regret that decision? No. The changes that have unfolded since then were, in my view, inevitable. In fact, I predicted these developments 5 years ago. Since 2016, has the UK improved or deteriorated? The answer, without a doubt, is that it has gotten worse. Could it have been better with a plan? Perhaps. But given the deep entrenchment of both sides, the intricate technical details, and the notoriously slow pace of parliamentary action, it was inevitable that debates would drag on regardless. The outcome in hindsight seemed predetermined by the very nature of our political landscape. Even with the current political lineup, which lacks the negotiation skills or decisiveness we desperately need, I firmly believe there must be a way. It must be possible to forge beneficial trade agreements with non-EU countries and maintain a productive relationship with the EU without being bound to its membership. The EU, in its current state, just doesn't align with Britain's needs, but there must be a path to a mutually advantageous arrangement. The blame for the lengthy Brexit process has largely fallen on Northern Ireland. Scotland, seeing no economic uplift, is poised to point the finger at England. This leads me to conclude that the fault lies not with Brexit itself, but with our own systems. The way devolution operates in the Good Friday Agreement, how the House of Commons and the House of Lords function, and our choice of parliamentary system over other democratic models are clear indicators that delays and disagreements across the UK are our doing. It wasn't Brexit's fault that other countries, including the EU, aren't as swift or as generous with trade deals as we might have hoped. But that responsibility falls squarely on us. Brexit has undeniably torn through our social fabric, leaving us divided in ways we never anticipated. Yet, it is precisely this fracture that provides us with a unique opportunity to heal, learn and innovate. I had planned to wrap this up with an inspiring speech about the boundless potential of an independent UK, and I still believe in that vision. But in crafting those words, I've had a revelation. Our relationship with Europe, long before Brexit was even a whisper, has been more of a disaster than a dance. It's fluid, ever-changing and far from over. Right now, as we speak, the Labour government is knocking on the door of Europe for customs union access. Meanwhile, the Conservatives and Reform are pushing to step out from under the European Court of Human Rights, believing it'll stem the tide of boat crossings. The other side, the Liberal Democrats dream of pulling us even closer to Europe. But there's plenty that we didn't cover in this documentary. The parts that are just as crucial, the lies, the mismanagement, the political games that benefit some at the expense of others. This isn't just history, it's our ongoing reality. We dream big, don't we? We dream of being a titan on the world stage like we once were. But are we really playing the game or just dreaming of it? We're dependent on Europe, but Europe? They seem to manage just fine without our constant input. So was Brexit worth it? No, not as it stands. Can it be made worth it? Perhaps. But do I trust that our nation, with its current political landscape, can unite to make it so? History, with its endless cycle of division and discord, tells me no. But now I want to hear from you. What do you think? Was Brexit a step forward or backwards? And can we make it work, or are we doomed to repeat our past mistakes? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe.